I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Port Over, and I'm so excited for you guys to meet Katie Runde. Her debut novel is called The Shore, and I'm going to let Katie introduce herself.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. I love the podcast, and it's in my regular rotation.
Thank you.
And yeah, I live now in Iowa City, but grew up at the Jersey Shore where the book is set. And professional background is teaching. I taught high school and have kind of lived all over before we ended up here. And as far as the book goes, it started out as my MFA thesis, and then life happened in between, and it went in my hard drive and 2 different laptops. and then after I had 2 kids, I finally returned to it and rethought it. And then, long story short, that brought us here.
Excellent. We're so happy to be here. Ask Again, Yes by Mary Beth Keane. If you've read this, you need to read The Shore. Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance by Alison Espach. If you've read that, you need to read The Shore. This is a very tightly written family story that takes place over the summer on the Jersey Shore. We've got the Dunn family. There's Brian and his wife, Margot, and their daughters, Liz and Evie. They're the heart of this book. And there's some other folks who come in and out of their orbits, and we may or may not get to them because this really is a book you want to sit with. It's one of those beach reads that's actually a little more than a beach read, and it's one of those domestic dramas that moves. So it's kind of the perfect moment for this book to come out. But how did we meet the Dunn family? How did this family show up for you?
It started out very early iterations of this book. The family was much more in the background, and it was a focus on one 17-year-old character, Liz, who is still one of the sisters. And then very slowly, the rest of the family started to emerge a little bit more. And I got to wonder more and more about what they were doing when I wasn't seeing them. And just had to write their stories as well. I queried a very early version of this book that was just a 17-year-old narrator. And it just wasn't meant to be that. It was really meant to be the story of this whole family. And then also got to know them better through kind of like their lives before we see them in this summer. I got really curious about what their lives were like before. So the mom and dad and how they met and how they broke up and what struggles they went through before we meet them this summer, and how the business, they have this tourist business in the Jersey Shore, this, vacation rental business. So I got really curious about how they started that business. And then it slowly became the story of the whole family.
Mm-hmm. We have to talk about the Jersey Shore for a second because it is its own character. I mean, place, we're going to come back to play. There are a lot of different ways place shows up in this book, but let's talk about the Jersey Shore for folks who don't know what the Jersey Shore is, because they're out there.
So I grew up there. I was, it's very interesting because my family actually my dad was a plumber, my mom was a teacher, but in the 80s, they actually had 2 houses. They had a summer house and a house in North Jersey. And then my dad kind of tried to have like regular jobs and did this plumbing day job in the winter, but just was drawn to the businesses and to living there. So we ended up moving there full time when I was like 3. And I grew up working in my family's boardwalk businesses. We had a wheel game. We had a snack bar called Marty's Doghouse. We had an umbrella stand, which that's one of the businesses in the book. And I was allowed to work there on my days off from the snack bar. But yeah, so I grew up there. And so some people know it from the reality show, the Jersey Shore reality show. Some people don't. It's enough years ago now. Or if you're not from the immediate area. And it's a wild place. There is nowhere like it, I just couldn't not write about this place because there were not 100 million books set there, and I read so many beach books that are lovely, that are beautiful, that are their own stories. And I couldn't believe that there weren't already 100 books set in this place. It's like, it really is a crazy place. Like if you're on the Seaside Heights boardwalk around 10 o'clock on a summer night, I've never been anywhere in the world like it. It's wild. There's really nothing like it. But then also there's this really quiet town next door, which is like actually where I lived, right? Like 2 blocks away from this really wild town. And on the Jersey Shore, it just changes that fast. There are these like 1-mile towns up the coast. and they change in a minute, and they all have their own personalities. So I always say that it really is like that, but that is one side of it. So I really wanted to show this other side of like the people that make it run and the people who are there in this beautiful, quiet off season. And there's a real beauty to it that I think, even if whether you know it or not, or you know it a little bit, you might not know in this way.
And it also has its own rhythms. This community is a real community. I mean, Brian is sick. He has a brain tumor. His personality has changed dramatically. His ability to run his business with his wife, Margot, is not, he just can't. He just cannot participate in anything really anymore. And the community really steps in to help Margot. But this is Margot's story and Liz's story and Evie's story. It's a coming of age for everyone in a way as Brian regresses.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And yes, you have Brian who's doing this sort of reverse coming of age, right? Where like everything that he's built and his whole personality is moving backwards, and he's really an unrecognizable person. And then you have the girls who are teenagers, and their stories were one of my favorite parts to write. This, like, if you have ever been a teenager or you know a teenager who's going through something hard, their teenage lives and just insist on on doubling down on becoming I think there's for these two girls, there's this like insistence on going out and trading off with each other and finding that summer love and doing what they're going to do. And then for Margot, she's in her 40s, and I think I'm closer to her age now, and I really understand that second coming of age, whether something hard is happening to you or not, but the more intense version of it when life as you know it is changing so drastically, and you're under so much stress. There's a reinvention that's, I think, required no matter what. And for her, it's like, an extra big version of that.
And motherhood is only one part of Margot's identity. And, there is sort of this idea in our society that motherhood is the thing that defines you.
Yes.
If you are a woman in this country, apparently a woman or a girl, this is the thing that everyone is supposed to aspire to. This is the thing. And Margot loves being a mom. She loves her children. She loves her husband. She also loves her job and her life and everything else. And all of that is about to change. And she is in the process of learning how to grieve. And so she makes a couple of decisions that we're not going to totally get in here. But one of them is she's thinking of leaving. Yeah. She's thinking of leaving the community and leaving it behind, which I thought was a really interesting decision on your part as the writer, because, again, we have this idea where motherhood is the thing and all of this. And Margot's like, no, I'm still a person.
Yes. And I could talk about the ways that motherhood, like the expectations of it and the limitations. And I could talk about that forever, especially in these times after the last 2 years. I love how whenever, I think it's Lauren Groff, whenever she's interviewed and they ask her if she gets asked, like, how do you find the time? She's like, I will answer that when you ask the men that. But back to Margot, she is so tied to her life in Seaside. Right. Like she hitched her wagon to Brian very young, which is another thing I actually would read 100 books about. I don't feel like I read 100 books about, this love that's really real and you're really ready for it. And you do hitch your wagons together early. And yes, she and Brian did that. And she cannot fathom like a potential life in this town and this business with him not in it. She wants to peace out. She wants to just like sidestep that, right? Like, in her head, she thinks she can, right? Like, no matter when the truth is, doesn't matter where you live, you can move to Disneyland. There's no way around it, right? But when things get really intense, I really understand why she feels that way and is tempted to make those plans. And the plans themselves is really interesting because I think there's like a positive spin on this. I've read an article about like planning a vacation, your brain lights up in the same way as when you're on the vacation, right? So I think she's able to like escape in a way, like as she's thinking of potentially what her life might be like later, and it's like it's a temporary escape for her, whether or not she ends up, following through with it. Right. We all do. I mean, even not under crisis, I look at Zillow all the time. You imagine your life in those houses, in those places.
And grief is hard. I mean, so much of literature obviously is driven by stories of loss and longing and heartbreak. And, because it's nice to sort of dip into it in a book and then walk back into your life. But grief has its own cadence. It doesn't really care what you're planning or what you're thinking, and the way each of these women respond. Yeah. And even Brian, to a certain extent, the book opens with him writing Post-its of words that he can remember.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful image, but also the girls, they uncover a secret, their mom's secret plan to sort of move. And of course, they're not having it, but they uncover it because everyone's online in this, what do we call it? It's not necessarily a self-help group. I guess it is a self-help group. Like a
forum. It sounds old-fashioned, but I think that's it's like a Reddit type group, like a forum. Okay. Even though it's an old-fashioned, as far as internet goes term, I think that's what it still is. It's where you have something in common, you make your username. It's one of the most old-fashioned web 1.0 things there is, but people still use them.
And here's Margot talking through her life with ostensible strangers. And Evie, her youngest, discovers what mom is up to and creates her own profile and starts talking to her mother as more of a peer, obviously, than as her kid.
A quote unquote peer.
Yeah. And it's wild watching this family connect in this way. But when did you know that was going to have to be a piece of it? Because, I mean, how else do you reveal someone's... The tech has to come in at some point, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I think so much that you just said is so interesting. As far as first of all, think of the times, right? And honestly, as this has come up in conversation about this book, everyone has done this at some point, right? Everyone has found one of these forums, and the times you find them are when it's something embarrassing or it's something so specific that no one in your life is going through it, right? Or it's something where Google has failed you, right? So my personal experience with one of these is when it took me longer to get pregnant than I thought it was going to. And you come to the end of your answers and you just want to talk to people who that's happening to them, as far as when it happens, right? It happens when you're not getting it in your life and you're not finding any other way, right? You find this new identity online and you find this community, and Margot does. And Abby kind of stumbles on it, but then, but I think they both stay there because it's giving them something they're not getting from each other. I think it is a universal experience too in a family to be surprised and thrown off by the ways that your other family members experience and go through their grief. It really is going to do what it's going to do on its own timeline. For a teenager, it might look like drinking way too much at a party. It might look like everything is okay. It might look like I'm getting a second job and I'm going to go work. I'm going to keep this routine going and I'm going to work. And for this family, one way it manifests is there's things that are just too hard to talk to each other about in person. And that hurts these teenage girls, right? There's something in them that's this isn't right and we should be. And that's when Abby goes and ends up finding and pursuing this relationship with her mom in this online world.
And those aren't the only funny moments in this book. I don't want people to think, oh no, this is the heaviest lifting in the world. It's not.
That's actually a great point. This particular teenage girl, and her interpretation of what a 40-something-year-old mom, how she would talk and what she was into is a moment where it was one of my favorite parts to write. Cause it's so funny when I taught high school kids, I think I was in my early 20s. They were like, what are you, 50? I told one kid, actually, I was teaching in Iowa, and my husband had matched for a residency in New York City from med school to residency. And so I told the kids that, and this kid raises his hand in the back and he's like, so are you still going to work here? Anyway, teenagers, the way that teenagers see grownups, and what they think about how they would communicate is a real opportunity for funny interactions.
And both Liz and Evie are very sweet girls. They're going through it, and no one really has a roadmap for how to grieve. I mean, we tell ourselves that we do, or we we read a lot of books, and no one genuinely has this roadmap. And also their dad is not who they remember. And you give these glimpses of who he was before he got sick. And it's clear that this is the defining event of this family's existence. But I have to give you a ton of credit because Brian and Margot, mom and dad, they have their own personalities. Like, they get to be people in this book, and it's not just, here's sick dad and here's mom doing what she can. They are actually people. And it's really fun to sort of see, even though the circumstances are terrible, it's still fun to see their evolution. I mean, Brian in the pants thing. I mean, it's a terrible moment, but at the same time, what are you going to do but laugh? There are moments where if you're really going through it, all you can do is laugh because it's just not anything that anyone has ever prepared you for.
No, I call it like a dark humor. It is this like improv show. It is this sort of like, well, we're doing this now. You find yourself, like in these situations where you're like, okay, I guess this is happening. I guess we're doing this now. And it is a really particular challenge when you have a character, any type of character. I actually think a glioblastoma brain tumor is very specific, and it can happen when you're younger, and it changes your personality and not necessarily your memory the way that more of like a dementia kind of story would. And there's a particular challenge in showing a full person when you only have them in this brief period when they're really not themselves. And for me in this particular project, I hope that I sort of did like less is more, right? That like, you don't need like a 200-page, like super long flashback chapter. I think you can get a big sense of his life and his life with Margot, in these very brief, almost like microfiction kind of pieces that allude to more. And, actually one of the things you mentioned too is this loss before loss, this really very specific experience that, over the years, like I found myself drawn to stories of people with dementia because they're very close in a lot of ways, like Goodbye Vitamin by Rachel Khong and We Are Not Ourselves by Matthew Thomas were books that I felt like just cracked open a world and they really did show full lives of these characters who in real time are not themselves, like I thought they did such a beautiful job of doing that. But there's something really specific about like loss before loss. You have to it's almost like you're losing every day, or it's almost like, like you lost it with the diagnosis and then you lose it every single day. And then you turn something off to like get through the day. And then you find somehow this humor and then, right. And then there's what's ahead, right? That's like, so there's so many layers to it,
Well, and also the personality changes that go with so much of this. I mean, when you have an idea, memory is really powerful, right? I mean, it drives a million different kinds of narratives. And the idea that everything isn't true anymore.
Right. Yeah. And the sort of like, I have not found a better word than, I know you said I could curse, but I won't, like mind F. Like a mind F of like, right. You look like this person I know, but you are not, right? Like that's just what's the word for that?
And part of this book does come from your own history. Your dad had the same kind of tumor that
he did,
Brian has. But this is not autofiction. Like, let's be clear. Yes, the setting is what it is and the tumor is what it is, but this is something that you conjured up to talk about the emotional repercussions and ramifications of a story like this. So can we just talk about taking that step back? Your dad was sick a number of years ago, so it's been a while.
Yeah, gosh, almost got sick about 20 years ago, passed away about 17. Yeah, about 17. So yeah, quite a long time. And it's interesting. No, it's definitely not autofiction, but I would like the scenes with Brian where he is, where he is not himself and he is causing chaos and the family's reacting to it. Each one is like, I feel like I could have written them forever. None of them is exactly what happened in my family, but I felt like I could have thought of them forever. And, one thing from that too is like, I really wanted to write about this age of loss, right? Somewhere between 16 and very early 20s. I also think is so specific. Like you're grown up, but not quite. And it's different from say like like Cheryl Stride's Wild, like in her late, that kind of loss that is eviscerating and gutting and life-changing. And it's different in your late 20s than when you're this like late teenager, right? Like I think there's something so particular about that. You sort of have to like, I call it like, you sort of like become a ghostwriter for like what your family would have done. And really quick. It's a really quick role reversal. Like you're like all of a sudden, and then you're making a lot of big plans for yourself, right? It's a really big time in someone's life. And you're like, okay, we're doing this. I'm doing this now.
Yep.
So I really wanted to write that stage and that age character. But it's interesting, like changing from what your own experience was to the book. My own sister is a lot younger. And so I think I made these girls really close in age so that they're going through more similar life stage, like that's 17.
Yeah, they're so sure of who they are and what they want and what's right and what's not. And they know what's best. It's that surety of a teenager. And honestly, we all know they know nothing and it's adorable, but they really...
It's the dramatic irony of reading about a teenager when you're a grown up, right?
Okay. So on top of it, you no longer live anywhere near the Jersey Shore. I don't think you could get any more landlocked than you are in Iowa City.
I moved for love.
Okay. That's totally fair. Totally legit. But I do want to talk about what happens to your sense of place, though, when you remove yourself from the actual place. Now, granted, you have not lived at the shore at a very long time, but you can get to the shore easily enough from New York City. So it's not just the physical change, it's the mental and emotional change that goes with it. So can we just talk about that for a second? Because also your community, you had to rebuild a community for yourself.
Yeah. Yes, I think I am sure that I will get like people from this area. They're very opinionated, so I am 100% sure I will get like some sort of little thing that like because I'm not there in like the whole month of January or something. My mom still lives in Seaside and we go and stay with her. We go and stay with her for as long as we can every summer. And I bring my kids out. I am there for like a good chunk of time and, try to visit as often as I can. And my sister lives nearby as well. She lives in New Jersey. So I have that tie. But I also think that I would not have written this if I had lived geographically closer, right? We've lived, so we're in Iowa City now. And then but we've lived in California. We lived in New York City over the years. And I think that sense of homesickness is what drew me back to this project throughout like all of life. There's like, I couldn't leave it alone, like I missed it so much and definitely didn't get it or appreciate the specialness of it or this particular beauty of it until you have to show up at a party full of strangers and answer that, like, where are you from question so many times. I'm not sure I would have written this book if I didn't have to do that over and over and over again in so many different places. Like there's all these, I always feel like I over answered it, right? You're like, no, this guy just wants to know, like, where does your mail go? Like now, like he doesn't. And I found myself giving this long answer and really wanting this place to be known by this person I just met at a party who may or may not be interested. So I was like, well, I'll show him. Just write 80,000 words about it.
But also, if you come from a place that has such a personality, the way Seaside does, and let's shout out Seaside because it is a very specific kind of place on the shore.
Is. Yes, yeah.
But also, you in this book, I mean, you're talking about class. You're talking about, well, not just class, but I mean, Brian has great medical care.
Yeah. Yes.
Everyone here is going to be fine in the end. I mean, unfortunately, there is death and dying, but everyone's going to be okay. No one's in danger of losing everything.
Absolutely. This family is in a privileged spot, right? As far as like as far as money and medicine and access, right? When you live in Jersey, you have access to two of the biggest cities and best medical care in the world, right? And yeah, so absolutely, they're super privileged. There's a part in the book where Liz's boyfriend, starts to figure some things out about her. And she's like, oh, this is one of our family's rental properties. And it's this beautiful rent. He's like, so are you guys rich?
Yeah.
And she thinks about it, and she's like, well, what she's gleaned from her family is this quote unquote like relationship with money it's complicated, right? Like, and that is the boardwalk life. It's complicated, right? In the 80s, my town got like a syringe tied, and like no one came, and like everybody doubled down on their winter jobs. My dad did more plumbing that winter, right? And we literally didn't turn the heat on in the downstairs of our house that winter, right? And then there are years in the 90s where like you cannot count the money fast enough. Just the cash coming home is like you literally have to like count it the rest of the night, but then you get hit by a hurricane, right, and everything's wiped out again. And anything you had is gone, and you have to rebuild it all. So I think the answer to that, like that money in a boardwalk town it's complicated, and it is not a regular day job, and it is really up and down. And I hope I tried to give like the way everybody understands it, the summer visitor boyfriend, the kids who are like, well, how does this affect us in a day to day? Like, we don't go to the country club or have like a fancy car, and we're like working our asses off. And Margot and what she's trying to manage. So that is the long and short answer to like money in Seaside,
But it matters because it is sort of how the community defines itself, and it's how, in some ways, the community steps up for Brian as well. So I don't want to leave it out of the conversation. It is certainly, a piece of this family and their experience of their community. But I want to talk about a different kind of community for a second, because you have an MFA, but you shout out a couple of different programs and some people that I would really like to talk to you about, because I think this is kind of cool. So you did a low-res MFA at Woodrow Wilson, and we're going to come back to that in a second, but you specifically shout out Jami Attenberg's 1,000 Words of Summer and Claire Vaye Watkins at a Tin House Summer Workshop, and Rufi Thorpe's the novel Chapter 1 class through Catapult. And these are all great people and all great organizations. So I really just want to go through the list and say, what did you learn from these women that you didn't learn from your MFA program? And then we're going to come back to MFAs in a second. But I think it's really important to shout out different kinds of resources for folks who are hoping to write or in the process of writing, or wherever you are in that experience for yourselves.
Oh, absolutely. So I loved my MFA, would shout it out all day, and happy to come back to that. And learned so much from it. But so these other three women, these other three classes, programs, one by one found me and found my project like right where I was at, and I would say in their own ways, were very accessible and nudged the project forward. Right. So I guess, so in chronological order, Rufi Thorpe's Catapult class was fall of 2016 online. And it was a class of all women online. And it was like straddled the 2016 election. So really stressful time just in history. Another book came out of that. Megan Angelo wrote a book called Followers that also came out of that same class. And what was great about Rufi is how she just was like unapologetically like, go with this, right? Like she was very different from like an MFA workshop, right? Like I feel like once you've done that more formal workshop, you can be more generative. And the class had such energy and such brilliant women in it. I think it was a little bit magic too, the combination of women who showed up for this class at that time, that I left that class with like, I brought this like thesis chapter. And that was actually where like, it was like, this needs something, it needs something, it needs something. And where I was finally brave enough to say brain tumor, this hard thing, like that wasn't part of the previous draft. And after that, it was like off to the races. It was like, you know, please like babies nap one more minute so I can finish, you know, it really was like, and I owe everything to Rufy's energy in that class. It was like very, like, you get to do one phone call in that class. And like, you know, each of these women in their own way, I think like were such an inspiration, but no one, like, she did not apologize for how hard it was going to be to do it with kids. She's like, it is, and you do it anyway. So then, in order, Jami Attenberg's 1,000 Words of Summer, which if you haven't heard of it, it's a Twitter hashtag. It's thousands and thousands of people participate in this every summer. And it is what it sounds like. I believe it's a couple of weeks, and it's everybody writes 1,000 words. That's it. You get this incredible free newsletter from her with advice from her writer pals that feels like it is just for you. And it feels like it is speaking exactly to your project. She has this tone that is also so encouraging, but also very real about the ups and downs and the emotional like labor of writing. And so like feeling like you were reporting back. I remember going to the Coralville library and finding my spot and, you know, getting my 1,000 words down, and that momentum just like adds up to something and is so important. And she is just so generous. I think like it's such a lesson in like what you can do with your success. Like, I think she's just been so generous with her own success and building this community. She does not have to do this. And it's a lot of work for her. And I'm so grateful that she did it. And then the last piece was Claire Vay Watkins was my workshop leader at the Tin House workshop. And what I would shout out there is like, I almost didn't go to that. And it was far away. I had little kids, and that was the most expensive of the three. You had to pay for it. And it changed my life. And it like, I thought these chapters were like my ticket into that workshop. And then I was going to go home and, you know, ditch it. And I remember her talking about like just calming everyone down and talking about, she called it getting the lay of the land, right? Like, so talking to new novelists about taking the time to like, it's almost like that Ocean's 11, you know, where you see everybody at the beginning, right? Then they're all doing their thing. Like giving a new novelist the permission. She's like, I trust you. You're like, I'm going where you're going. You can take another minute and give us the lay of the land. And she is also just so brilliant. And one thing about that is like, when I wasn't sure whether to go, I reached out to a writer named Kate Hope Day. She wrote a book called If Then. I only knew her from Twitter. And I all I knew was she was a mom and she had a book and she went to Tin House. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to go to this. Should I go to this? And she said, go. And I encourage any writer who is in that position to do the same thing, because people are very generous and will be very honest with you. Another book came out of that too. The Atmospherians by Isle McElroy also came from that workshop. So just have to shout out all the great work that came from all these. And I can't even name all the 1,000 Words of Summer books that are out in the world. Right. So I'm so grateful to all those women.
So you did a low-res MFA at Warren Wilson. So can we talk about what that experience is? Because I think not everyone knows that low-res MFAs exist or what they mean or how they can sort them into their own lives.
Oh, absolutely. I also didn't know that it existed. I took a class at the Iowa City has something called the Summer Writing Festival. It's like an anyone welcome type of workshop. And I heard from someone there that they existed at the time where, as I mentioned earlier, right, my husband went to med school here, and then you do something called a match when you're in med school and doing residency, which a lot of people don't know how that works. It's like, you make a list and then the residency programs make a list. And then one day it spits out where you're going to go and live. You find out this one day in March, like where you're going to live in 2 months. So I was itching. I'd been teaching for 4 years and I was just itching to go to grad school, but I didn't know for sure what city I was going to live in. And I really didn't want to wait. I really didn't want to put it off and get a job for a year and then go. And so this was the perfect thing because I didn't know where I was going to live, but it didn't matter. So, and I would also shout out that one really cool thing about it is that the kinds of students it attracts are students from all walks of life and students who also can't leave their lives, right? They have really cool full-time jobs that they keep, and they have kids or they're older and they're retired and brilliant and are now starting to be writers. And it's amazing for that. I mean, I think a full residency MFA program is also amazing in its own way. And that like sequestered, version of writing, some incredible work comes out of that too. But I can't shout out enough like that environment, and I'd also shout out I think that for better or worse, my program was very removed from publishing, and now I would say that I love that. There were probably times when I was like impatient earlier. I'd be like, why are we not having agent wine and cheese? But I actually think for your project, like, I think it's very wise. I think it's very like, I think it was exactly what I needed. And honestly, it's probably what most projects need as they're incubating, you can figure that part out. And the supervisors that I had throughout that time have been so generous. When you're ready for that, there's somebody still there you can reach back out to, and they will like take you through it. But at the time, I personally think that's what was better for me. So that model is pretty specific to low residency programs, and I really recommend it.
And really, it just sounds like you have to do the work. No matter what program you chose or where you went, or if you stayed home, you just have to write. And then the rest of it kind of makes sense.
There's a give and take though. Like I'm going to be 40 and there's been so many ups and downs, and you have these stops and starts and these moments that really encourage you, right? Like pieces of this book have, been stories, and that gives you this little jump start and this little, like, I'm so grateful to all the short story editors, journal editors over the years too. Like there's such beautiful work, and there's such a community on Twitter of Lit Mag. Twitter is, I personally think, the best corner of Twitter. There's a lot of less great corners of Twitter.
Oh, there are.
Lit Mag Twitter is so generous. It's you really can find a community there. If you're a person who's like not going to do an MFA, but are in search of a community, I do recommend it. It can be a little intimidating, but you really can find your people there. You really, truly can.
You've talked about a lot of the books that have influenced you as you were working on this, and we have a pretty good idea of who you are as a reader. But let me ask, why do you write?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was Jennifer Egan came through Iowa City a couple of years ago, and she quoted another writer who I don't remember who she was quoting, but it's kind of funny. It was, and it was like, she got asked the same question. And I agree with her that it's like, is your life better, right? Like, do you feel more like yourself when you are writing, like no matter what it is? And if you can do anything else, right? Like you should have any other hobby if you can. But, like I have a friend who's an OBGYN, and she has she's this very intense day job and the most beautiful garden in our entire town. Right. And I hate gardening. I really hate it. And so I think you should do it if you notice a pattern and you feel more like yourself, whether you're going back to your family or your day job, and something feels better, whether you wrote nonsense or revised or wrote something in your notes app, then you should. And that's why I do.
Knowing all of that, did anything surprise you while you were writing The Shore? I mean, it seems like you knew where this book was going and the kind of ground you wanted to cover, but someone or something had to have surprised you while you were writing.
Oh, that is such a great question. And I think my answer to that is the places where it like feels like it wrote itself surprised me. And I am always fascinated because it's not, if you read a book totally out of context and then you talk to the author, it's almost never what you would guess. And so for me, it was the forms, it was the alternate forms, right? That felt like they wrote themselves and felt like that magical, like whatever woo-woo thing you want to call it, like, like muse energy, whatever. Like, so that's like emails between characters. That's like these forum posts where like a character within a character is taking on this new identity. And some of the places, and some of the text exchanges that felt like, so I would say those surprised me in where it felt like they came from. But if you're in this position and you're a writer yourself, I would say like they came from the work you did to get to know the people before and then. So those surprised me, and they have stayed consistent throughout so many drafts, right? Like trimmed, but like the core of them has stayed very similar to their original iterations. And I remember where I was writing them, like it was such a surprise. Those were like nap time, nap time frenzied, like one more, like she's got one more thing to say here, so those for sure surprised me. And I wish, wouldn't it be great if you could conjure it and make that happen? But you can't. You just have to show up.
Do you miss the Duns?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't, because I don't feel like I left them. I think about them all the time. And right now I'm talking about them more too, but I think even when the time passes that I'm talking about them more often, no, I think about them all the time. I think about like the music they listen to. And when I was back in Seaside last summer, it felt like Liz was going for a run with me on the boardwalk. And so I don't, because I don't feel like I left them.
So great. That's really, really wonderful. So what's next for you?
Yeah. Next, writing wise, I am in the very like generative, messing around, trying things, and actually very looking forward to 1,000 Words of Summer. It's coming up again, and I'm definitely joining again this year. And it's a really fun place to be. I think like some writers are freaked out by it or intimidated by it. And I am really enjoying it. You should see my file names. I think one of the best parts about we've got, it's like that's a great like writer, like you could get them going on that probably, like writer cocktail party. We've got like F around and find out. We've got, all kinds of, that's where you find the expletives and those file names. That's what we're doing now.
Okay, that sounds like a really excellent plan. Katie Runde, thank you so much for joining us on Port Over the Shore is out now.
Thank you.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Topoff, where we recommend books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of The Shore. I'm Marc. I'm coming to you from my Barnes & Noble home store in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am joined by one of my favorite book buddies, Becky. Hello, Becky.
Hi.
So we've got a few books to talk about today. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I'm going to start with a book that is about something specific. It's that specific love that only siblings share, that is tempered from childhood and carried into adulthood. This book did something to me that's never happened before. It made me want to check in with my siblings. So the book follows the Skinner clan. You have Renee, you have Caroline, Joseph, and Fiona. And you follow them during their childhood, you follow them as adults, but during their childhood specifically is a period in the summer that they called the pause. So the pause occurred when they were, I think the age range was something like 13 down to age 5. And it was a time right after their father's death, and when their mother has sunk into a depression that really makes her incapable of taking care of herself, let alone her 4 children. So these kids have to fend for themselves, and they do, for the most part, successfully. There are a couple of moments of sheer trauma that no child should go through. But ultimately, it bands these children together and cements this bond that they can carry with them for their whole lives. Cut to them as adults, where that bond is probably more strained than they would have expected. It's kind of that, why don't you just send me a text instead of give me a call? I don't really have time for your nonsense. I've got other things going on. I have my whole life to deal with. All 4 of these siblings are going through basically that until something happens that brings them together again. If you have siblings, you should read this book. Like I said, I am the youngest of 6, and during the reading of this book, but specifically at the end, I felt this urgent need to reach out to each of them. I called all 3 of my sisters and both of my brothers, and they kind of acted the same way that the Skinners did. Like, what are you doing? Like, you could have sent this in a text. But it is what it is. I loved the book. It made me miss my siblings, and I think that it will do the same for anybody. So please check out The Last Romantics by Tara Conklin. Becky, do you have one for us?
I do. Well, first of all, that book sounds incredible. And as the older sister of a younger brother, it might be something I need to read and then maybe reach out to my my younger sibling to
Perhaps.
see. So the book I thought of with this is The Age of Miracles. I actually brought it with me. And this is by Karen Thompson Walker. This was her debut.
Is that an ARC?
It is.
Oh.
This is the advanced reader copy from 2012. I swooped it up when I first saw the ARC at the store, and I have loved it ever since. I have loaned it to other people, but I've always gotten it back because I just adore it. It's just a beautiful coming-of-age tale. It follows Julia. She's 12 going on 13, and her family, they live in California, and it's just a typical summer. Nothing special, just kind of those middle school things that are happening. Maybe kind of noticing boys a little bit more, and boys noticing her, and then just noticing the dynamics of her family and how her parents' relationship works, and all of those things. And then all of a sudden, even though it's been happening for a while, none of them were noticing. But the news puts out a notice that the world has stopped turning. And it's one of those things that, you didn't know that it was happening, but you kind of knew already. But now that everybody knows, and it changes everything. So you have all of that coming of age stuff that we were talking about, but now it's against this backdrop of possibly the end of the world. With the change, the days are getting longer. The weather is intensifying. They live in California. The waves are crazy. And it's interesting just how, the world stopping turning, how that affects the waves, how it affects nature, how it affects the environment, how it affects people. Their mental states, and then how people and animals and all things react to this change to the norm. So this is, like I said, just a beautiful book. It's full of all of those feels that you get from those coming of age stories, but again, with that speculative kind of piece there that just adds a little extra and keeps you wondering, what would I do? What would the people I know do in a situation like this? So when you get a chance, definitely stop in and pick up Age of Miracles by Karen Thompson Walker.
Oh, such a good book. And I'm almost certain that I did a small battle with you for that copy of the ARC, and you being significantly stronger than me. Won, but that's fine.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I was able to get my hands on a copy, and I read it early on as well, right after your recommendation, so it's all good. So I do have one more book to talk about. This book is also about family and uncovering truths, and it is Searching for Sylvie Lee by Jean Kwok. I really enjoyed this book very much. You follow 3 different points of view. You have Sylvie, you have her sister Amy, and their mother. So Sylvie goes missing, title is aptly named, and Amy is attempting to retrace her steps to find out what's going on with her. And what she uncovers is a lot more deep truths about her family. This is a book about language. It's a book about immigration, about racism. It's about those unspoken things that every family has, that they just don't talk about that thing, but they really should talk about that thing. It's less about the disappearance of Sylvie, although that has this really fantastic way to sort of tug the narrative along. It's more about family and society and the truly urgent need for empathy. I think fiction is the perfect way to build your empathy muscle. It allows you to inhabit a life and a past outside of your own, and lets you then layer that perspective into your day-to-day. So if you're looking for something to broaden your scope, please pick out Searching for Sylvie Lee by Jean Kwok. And that's all we've got today. This was our first video episode.
We hope you liked it.
I think I had a good time. Thank you so much for listening to Poured Over. Please rate and subscribe us so you never miss an episode. You can follow mine and Becky's home store at BN Westchester. Thank you so much. Happy reading.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. The show is available on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts.